Hi, I'm Erik Nook. I'm a clinical psychology PhD student at Harvard University, and I want to tell you about some of my research on how you can use your words to help you change how you feel. In this video, I'm going to tell you about 3 ideas and 1 experiment. So first, let's talk about emotion regulation. This is the technical psychological term for the set of strategies that people use to change how they feel. Whenever people have an emotion, they have choices about how to change that emotion. And I'll ask my friend Bob here to help me explain one of these strategies. So let's say Bob has plans to spend next weekend outside, enjoying the lovely weather with his friends, until he learns that it's going to be pouring with rain. This news makes Bob feel quite sad. But don't worry, in this situation, Bob can change how he feels or regulate his emotions. For instance, he might reinterpret the situation to change what it means to him, and consequently how he feels about it. For example, Bob could see this weekend's rainy weather as an excellent opportunity to play a fun new Zoom game with friends, without any of them needing to leave the house. This reinterpretation can help Bob feel better about the weekend's weather. And we call this specific emotion regulation strategy cognitive reappraisal. Many studies show that using cognitive reappraisal helps people feel better, and that it's a key skill for mental health and well-being. So I want to study how people can use their words, their language, to most effectively regulate their emotions. But what kinds of words might help us change our feelings? Well, to understand which words we focus on in our research, let's talk about the second idea I want to teach you about today, psychological distancing. One strategy that people can use to regulate their emotions is to see stressful situations as more separate or distant from oneself. Research shows that this change in perspective helps people feel better about things. And I bet you've actually encouraged other people to use this technique yourselves, because we often tell people who are distressed to take a step back, or give it some time, or give someone some space to cool down after a conflict. All of these quotes grow out of the idea that distance helps people regulate emotions. But even more than that, these quotes reveal something deep about how the mind represents psychological distance. Researchers have found that the human mind collapses 3 different domains of distance, physical, temporal, and social, onto a single dimension of psychological distance. You can get a sense for what I mean by this by noticing that if you're watching this in the United States, you feel closer to Boston than Berlin. We feel closer to our best friends than we do to strangers like our baristas, and we feel closer to tonight than we do to tomorrow. In fact, an entire theory called the construal level theory is based on loads of behavioral and neural evidence that our mind collapses all 3 of these dimensions onto a common code. But what does this have to do with how our words help us regulate our emotions? Well, to explain that, I have to tell you about the third and final idea of today's video, linguistic distance. So what's amazing is that not only are these 3 dimensions of psychological distance inextricably linked in our minds, they're also encoded in our language. When people use more first-person singular pronouns like I, me, mine, and my, they're discussing their closest social target, themselves. And when people use more present tense verbs, they're discussing the closest temporal target, the present moment. So we can measure how close or distant a person's current psychological focus is merely by analyzing their use of pronouns and verbs. So now I get to connect these 3 ideas to each other by describing an experiment that I've done. So if language tracks how distanced our perspective is and increasing psychological distance downregulates negative emotions, then can you have people feel better about things just by using more distanced language? Well, we tested this question by having participants write about their thoughts and feelings in response to negative images. After each trial, they told us how bad they felt on a 1 to 7 scale, but crucially, we experimentally manipulated how they wrote about the images. One set of participants in the physical distancing condition wrote about half of the images as if they were happening physically close to them when they saw the word here above the image, and they wrote about the other half of the images as if they were happening physically far away when they saw the word not here. A second set of participants distanced along the social dimension by using the word I when writing about one set of images and not using the word I when writing about the other set of images. Finally, a third set of participants distanced along the temporal dimension by either using the present tense or not using the present tense when writing about images. We found that all 3 methods of linguistic distancing reduced negative affect. When participants wrote about things as happening far away from them physically, they reported feeling less negative affect, the lighter bar, compared to when they wrote as if the images were taking place physically close to them, the darker bar. Similarly, simply refraining from using the word I reduce negative affect, and the same was true for reducing present tense verbs. So merely increasing the distance in one's language can downregulate negative emotions. So what you can take away from this study is that people feel better if they change their words to be a little more distant. Don't use the word I or present tense verbs, and you can immediately get some space and feel less stressed. This experiment is corroborated by several other studies that have found similar effects, including one showing that people feel less stressed about an impromptu speech if they distance their language when they're preparing for it. So right now, I'm extending this research to see if we can detect people suffering from psychological disorders just by the way they use distancing language, or if we can improve therapy by having clinicians distance their own or their patient's language. So stay tuned for those results, and thank you so much for listening.